Hey, welcome back. You made it. So this is really our first content video in this series on understanding cause. We're really trying to conduct root cause analysis. Again, I hate the word root cause, and as you get through more of these videos, you'll understand why. But let's call it understanding cause, discovering cause. Really, we want to figure out what are the causes that are somehow working together in some interrelated fashion that are going to bring some effect into existence. All right, so let's see what this looks like. I'm going to give you a scenario first. Now you see there's a couple images here. You've got a house, you've got a freeway, maybe it's a road, and you've got a building. And I'll give you a scenario that's going to turn that into a hospital in just a minute. But before I do, let me give you a very, very simple scenario. Let's assume that you are getting up in the morning, first thing in the morning, and you either come downstairs or you walk into your hallway and maybe you have kids, maybe you have a flatmate or a housemate, maybe a partner, maybe some other relative or family member living with you. And let's assume they've left something in the hallway. Okay? Maybe it's Legos are the worst. Have you ever have you ever stepped on a Lego? You know you're going to the hospital, right? Let's maybe it's not as bad as a Lego. And no, they're not my kids, they're mine. But let's assume there's something in the hallway, okay, and you don't see it. And you trip over that object. Maybe it's a shoe, maybe it's a box, maybe it's a shopping bag or something. You trip over that object in the hallway and you fall on the ground, okay? If I asked you what was the cause of you falling on the ground, what would you say? If you actually pause this for a second and you think about this and you really think deeply, for the majority of people, you're actually really going to struggle with this, articulating what the cause of your fall is. Okay, it's actually not as easy or as straightforward as you think it is. Okay, but some people will say, well, the cause is my partner, my son, my daughter, my flatmate left something in the hallway. Okay, well, did that thing being left in the hallway cause you to trip over it? Some people might say, oh, well, maybe in this case, I'm just guessing here, but I was in a hurry. I was maybe looking at my phone. I wasn't looking down, and I didn't see something, and so I tripped over it. And so you're kind of looking at it yourself. You tripped over that object. Well, you're still not quite there. Okay, this is actually not as easy as you think. And if you're struggling with this, answering this question about what caused you to fall down in your hallway, imagine how difficult this situation can be in a business environment. Well, that's what I want to do right now. I want to start to unpack how we think about cause, and I want to start giving you two ways in which to frame up the cause effect relationship. And the first two things that we're going to look at are, or think about, are time and space. Okay, we'll start with space. If you have a look here, let's say we've got a house. You can think of that house as a place in space, a container in space. And in this case, it's a container that's holding maybe you, right? And let's take this into a business example. So you move from that container, that location, that space, and you hop on the freeway. And the moment that you hop into your car, which is another space, by the way, and you jump on the freeway or you jump on the side roads to get to your work, you are traveling past and on different spaces. Okay. And then finally you arrive at the hospital where maybe you work. Maybe you're a physician or a nurse or something like that, surgeon or something. Could be an admin, HR. So when you get there, again, you have arrived at another space. Okay, this is the container that's holding, in our case, you. Okay, maybe it's you've got your laptop with you, you've got all your work equipment, you've got your scrubs on, all of the gear and the tools and the things that you need to perform the activities that you perform as part of your daily routine. Okay? So the first thing I want you to get your head around is as we move through different areas, buildings, states, environment, we can actually containerize that place. Okay? And sometimes we think about these as islands of complexity, but I really like to just think of them as containers. Okay? In a later video, I'll talk about systems and subsystems and super systems and things like that. And you'll start to understand how systems interact and sometimes interact with super systems. But let's park that for just a moment. For right now, let's just think about ourselves being in some room like this, or some house, or some building, or some car, as being in a space. Okay? So, back to that example we just talked about. When you fell down in the hallway, you were in a space. You were in your house, and your house is in a certain suburb, or a certain town, or a certain state, or a country, or whatever the case is. So you can wrap yourself around, you can wrap yourself with these containers. Okay? That's part one. Now, there's something else I'd like you to think about, and that is time. Now, I'm not going to get us into the physics of this, but to make things simple, time, let's think about this for a second. Time doesn't necessarily pass. Okay? We can discuss what time is and what time isn't in another session, but for right now, the way that I like us to think about time in this environment is just a stamp. Okay? So it's not so much that time is passing, but that we as an object are moving into different containers. And we can look at our clock and see what day, what time, what month, what year it is, and it helps give us a stamp, right? So, and I'll show you what this looks like in just a second as we move from the house to the road to the hospital. But what I want you to think about is the fact that time kind of sits over us in this cone, right? And as we move further down the cone, we're actually moving further back in time. So you can kind of look behind yourself and you can think, oh, last week I was back here, right? So if you're sitting at some top level effect, that's where you step into the hallway and you trip and fall. If you move back in time, where were you 5 seconds before you fell? Were you in your bedroom? Were you in the bathroom? Were you outside? What about 1 minute before that? What about 10 minutes before that? And again, that's just a stamp for where you were in space. Okay? So we have space, which is the containers, and we have time sitting around us in this cone, and we're moving from the bottom to the top. Okay? So if we scroll down a little bit more, and I'll just say I'm sorry, I know the lighting's terrible, the sound is terrible. I just have my boom mic. I don't have my mouse. I'm traveling, and I've got none of the things I would have set up in my office. So I'm sorry, and thanks for bearing with me. Now let's look at this situation here. We've got the house, okay, we've got a road, and we've got a hospital. And here's another hallway. Now let's give another scenario, but this time in a business environment. Let's say that the hallway that you step into is a hallway in the hospital, okay? And because of COVID, because of what's happening in your local area or in some hospital somewhere in the world, the physician, which is maybe yourself, steps out of that room and you're looking at the clipboard and you just did not pay attention to the fact that you've got all of this equipment, all of these monitors and things sitting right outside the room. And so you hit your foot on the side of one of these pieces of equipment and you take a spill and you don't practice jujitsu, so you don't know how to break fall, and unfortunately you break your wrist or something like that. Now this is an accident scenario, okay? But we can start to think about number one, the containers that we have. So I know that I'm in the hospital. I know that I'm in the hallway, right? I can containerize where I'm at when this accident's happening. But I also have a timestamp here, right? So you can look at the timestamp down the left and you can go backwards in time, like as if you had a camera and you were taking snapshots of where you were. The accident happens at 9:19 a.m. That's when you stepped around the corner. You tripped, you fell, you broke your wrist. What if we go back to 8:42? Oh, maybe you were just getting to the hospital. What about 7:51? Okay, maybe at 7:51 you had just jumped on the freeway. So you had your almost hour-long commute to get to the hospital. And before that, maybe 6:30 a.m. you were just waking up in your own home. The point I want to make here is when we start thinking about undertaking causal analysis, and we look at things like 5 whys and Pareto charts and fishbone diagrams, cause trees kind of get us there, but there's a lot that cause trees miss. But one of the big things they miss is time and space. Okay, it's so critically important that when you start to lay out your canvas, one of the very first things you are thinking about is where and when does this happen or did this happen? Okay, so let's look at another example here. And again, sorry about the scrolling. This is this is the best I've got. All right. So here's my containers, right? I've taken away the picture of the house, and now I have a container of a house. And you can see that I'm occupying that house for a certain amount of time, right? From 6:30 to 7:51. And then I'm hopping on the freeway, and you can see there's an overlap between that space because maybe the freeway or the neighborhood road leads right to my house. And then the same thing, maybe it leads directly to the hospital. When I hit that top level effect, which for us, when we build the cause tree, the top level effect sits at the very top because that's where the accident happens. That's the top of my time cone, right? When I look here, what I can see is that this effect, and we're gonna flesh this out and do in more series down the track, okay? I know there's a lot missing here, but bear with me. We're just setting up the skeletons. That top level effect is sitting at the point where I'm inside the hallway, inside the hospital at 9:19 a.m. Okay? So we're starting to just lay the foundation, the bones of what we call our causal landscape diagram. And that's exactly what we're doing. We're building a landscape. We're trying to capture the islands of complexity. We're trying to identify where and when things happen. Now, think for a second if you're dealing with a service, okay? You want to know, maybe you've got a system, okay? You want to know where your customers are interacting with that system or that service. Okay, you've got technologies, things like that, smartphone, an app. They're dealing with some sort of machine, some sort of device, right? You can start to use this idea of space and containerize which states it's happening in, which brands it's happening in, which types of customers or which segment, which market segment are being affected by this. You can containerize these things in any way that makes sense to you. But the first point is we need to containerize them. Okay. And what this starts to do then is show us where the overlap is. Okay. I don't have to put hallway there. I can put customer, right? So I can see where the customer is interacting with that specific environment. And again, the timestamp is critically important. If I'm looking at service delivery, I can start to see straight away where the customer is interacting with maybe my customer service team and at what point in time. Is this T minus? So when I say T minus, I'm going minus as in going backwards, right? If the top level effect is T equals 0, T minus 1 day is 1 day before the top level effect. So if for instance the customer is interacting with the customer service at T minus 5 days, that means the problem could actually be manifesting or start manifesting 5 days before the customer actually gets their service installed or that technician arrives at their doorstep or whatever the case is. So very first thing we do, we set up the time and we set up the space. And we think about how to containerize that space so that in a little bit, we can actually go in and start identifying the objects and how those two objects interact with one another and the nature of that interaction. Is it harmful? Is it insufficient? Okay. And then from there, we can start to think about things like span of control, sphere of influence, all different sorts of things. But this is our very first stepping off point. So the next time you jump into a session, and maybe you've got a session tomorrow, again, maybe you're cramming, Think about, even if you're using 5 whys, even if you don't know the rest of this approach, start when you interrogate with your 5 whys, start thinking about where and when, and prime those questions with your stakeholders. And 5 whys again is just asking why. Why did you do that? Oh, you did that, and why did you do that? Right? But set the framework by drilling into the specific locations at the specific time and then go through your 5 whys. Just that alone will make your 5 whys much more effective. Okay. Anyway, I hope this is helpful. Again, if it is, please leave a comment. Please leave feedback. I'd love to hear from you. And otherwise, I'll start dropping these videos if I can on a weekly basis. And then hopefully we can start to build out your knowledge base and give you a bit of ammunition to use when you're undertaking your root cause analysis. I'm Mike Irasi, and thanks for tuning in.